So for the benefit of being able to jam-pack as many lessons into this video as possible,
Sure.
I asked you to provide me a list of some of the biggest lessons that you've taken away from the work that you've done with thousands of people. So what I thought we could do is just share these together. So what I can do is read them and then maybe ask you a couple questions to put them into context. You
Sure.
game?
Okay. I'll go with it.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. All right, so I asked you, what are the biggest life lessons you've experienced from your work with men, from your work with convicts in prison, because we know those are high pressure situations, and through conflict resolution where a lot is at stake, especially in the business setting. So your first answer is choose your battles carefully, then fight the few to the fullest. Tell me more.
I had a wonderful teacher many years ago, and what he taught me was you get to be right and alone. And I found that all the time. I would just hammer you and talk about, earlier, why I do conflict work. I would get into conflict with you because I was going to prove to you that I'm right. Well, everything became a battle. When you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's one of those things. And what I learned over time was not to allow most of life's circumstances, most of people's idiosyncrasies, most of the interactions that I get into where I will get upset in some way because I'm not getting what I want, or maybe I'm not getting seen, I will start to make everything a battle, whether a little tiny battle or a big one. And it's simply exhausting. It's just exhausting. And the fact is, you're not going to win many of those battles. So what I learned as I let go of interactions where I could feel that I was starting to make it a battle, and I would just let go of it. And the more I let go of it, the more I just said, it's not that important. It's just simply not that important to prove to you that I'm right, and therefore you must be wrong. And to let go of a lot of those battles. And then when the few that were really important to me, some moral value of mine had been breached perhaps, something that I determined was important, you would know it, and I would definitely pursue that battle. I use the word battle as a disagreement. It's not a physical confrontation. But I would let you know, this is important to me, and we're going to fight around this one because it's that important.
Are you familiar with the metaphor about the life stages of men and being a knight versus, progressing through life and eventually becoming a king?
I am. Absolutely.
So do you find that, clearly you're a king, right? You're sitting here now in front of me as a king. So I'm wondering, do you feel like when you were in the knight stage, it was more important to battle, and now you've recognized that picking your battles is more important?
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. I deal with an archetypal structure of king, warrior, lover, magician. And there are many, many archetypes out there, but the classic four. And for years, in my 30s and 40s perhaps, I was a warrior. And I still carry a lot of warrior energy. So battles make me happy. I'm there to serve the realm, which means I'm going to fight the battles. And I was good at it, and I liked it, and I won a lot. As I get older and a little more mature just with life experience and step much more into that place of the sovereign, that's not my place to fight battles. But if there's something that comes to me as the sovereign that's really important, I will fight that battle to preserve my realm. So that's how it would be expressed archetypally.
It is really interesting that you've experienced this phase of having conflicts and needing to come to this to arrive at this place of not needing to fight all of your battles, and also choosing law as a profession and now conflict resolution as your platforms. It's really great because I think people can learn from you, because there's some element of that in everybody in terms of wanting to fight those fights, and this is where you're comfortable. This is your stage. You get it, and you've helped so many people through them. Yeah. So hopefully that'll lead us to the beauty that's going to come from all these other lessons. Develop your own unique life code, then live by it. So how does one determine what their life code is?
Developing a life code to me is essential if I want to have any sense of purpose, of mission, of who I am and why am I here? What am I here to do? I mean, the two most critical questions to any of us funny little human beings is, who am I and why am I here? Without some sort of code to live by, I don't believe we can ever really find the answers to that question. And what I've learned for myself is, for many years, I really didn't have a code, and it wasn't clear. It was, what do I really stand up for? What is non-negotiable in my life? And so I've developed my own code, and it's very simple. It is around integrity, doing what I say I'm going to do, accountability, where I'm accountable for when I don't do that, and looking at intention and impact, that I may have the best intention in the world, and it may not land on you that way, and I'm still responsible for that impact, even though it wasn't my intention. Without a code, I think we are a bit lost and can go through our entire life that way and never really address, who am I and why am I here?
Listen very carefully to what someone else has to say. That sounds so simple.
It is. It's very simple. It's just unfortunate that we don't do it very often. I don't do it very often. I'm getting better at it. I have good listening skills, but it took years of practice and focusing on, am I really listening to this person? And then finding myself in a lot of situations where I catch myself and say, I'm not listening to what this person is saying at all. Either I don't care, I'm not interested, it bores me, or I'm getting my answer ready. And so the process is really very simple. Take the time, take a breath, listen to what they're saying. It's critically important to any relationship.
With all our differences, we are much more alike than different. Tell me what your thoughts are on that.
This is a bit of a dangerous one because over the last number of years, I've done a lot of multicultural and diversity work. And when I deal with a men's organization like the Mankind Project and leading the trainings and facilitating with them, what we learned many, many years ago was we said all men are the same. We're all men, and therefore they're the same. And what we learned shortly thereafter is that dismisses men of different race, different color, different sexual orientation, men of difference. And it negated the difference. And so I've spent a lot of time working through what is the both and here? How do I honor the differences? And at the same time, we're all men. So the best example I've had of that is being in 4-day intense trainings in Folsom Prison. Now this is level 4 maximum security. These are some very tough men. And what I learned was they had just as great a need to be seen as I do. It was exactly the same. And as I would work and facilitate them with issues around the decisions and the choices they've made in their life, the conflicts they've been in, and how it's taken them down some very dark paths with horrific results. What I learned as we would discuss, how did you make that decision? What was going on in your life such that you made that kind of decision? And what I found was what their answer was and what men on the outside that I facilitated around the world, their answers were identical. As little babies, did they have a father in place? Did they have a mother in place? Were they feeling loved? Were they feeling appreciated? Or were they just feeling completely neglected? And as I saw this happen over and over again, what I learned was the issues of those men were more intense, but essentially exactly the same issues of any number of men from any number of countries around the world. And that's where I came up with we really are very similar.
It shows you how important it is to be very conscious in your choices because they can lead you down such different roads.
Absolutely.
Some people have adversity and they end up succeeding. Other people have adversity and they end up in prison.
Exactly. And how quickly there are some of us, and some people I know very well, who will be the first to condemn that group of men because of the decisions they made without understanding, well, how did they get there when they may have had the same kind of wounds and the same kind of issues growing up that they had the ability to work through. These men didn't, and they made some very bad choices.
Yeah, they may not have had the role models or whatever, but at least we can maybe look at them in a more compassionate way with that understanding.
With some compassion, yes.
When in doubt, ask. What's Spirit trying to get done here?
I was taught that phrase by the man who was an ex-convict, ex-heroin addict who started this program in Folsom Prison. And as I went in early on, we would be in these very complex, bizarre situations and trying to figure out, well, what are we going to do next? And where are we going to go? And just being rather hopelessly lost because of the situation that we found ourselves in. And what he would say, and he would just stop the group and he'd say, so what's Spirit trying to get done? And everyone would come to attention and stop and ask themselves, so what's really trying to happen here? And we would generally get underneath the dynamic that was going on to something much deeper and much more important that we all align to. So I found that that's a bit of a mantra for me, and I've brought it to the facilitation that I've done around the world. And there will be people after having met me that will take that phrase on, and I will hear them talk about a situation they're in, a problem they're dealing with, and they'll look at whoever they're dealing with and say, so I wonder what Spirit is trying to get done here. So that's what it means to me.
I love it. It seems like it's about getting outside of ourselves a little bit and aligning to something bigger.
Exactly. Yeah, that's precisely what it is.
Wonderful. I loved an early conversation we had about this because it relates to the work that I'm doing, and I asked you, at what point should a person start to ask for help? And this seems to be a really interesting observation to see this on your sheet. You say, ask for help early and often. So it answered it. So they need to ask when?
Early and often.
Early and often.
It's pretty simple. I think this was and continues to be one of the most important life lessons for me. And that, again, coming from that place of the sovereign, I felt quite often I understood what was going on. I had answers to what was going on. They were good answers. They were my answers. And I thought they would be effective. And what didn't happen was I didn't ask questions. I didn't really try to find out what was going on. And I would make assumptions, and then I would come up with what I thought were good answers, and then find out that I really hadn't paid attention and hadn't asked enough questions to really understand what was happening. And so now I just say, ask lots and lots of questions, and ask them early and ask them often, and continue to ask questions. It will very much help the other person to get a sense of being appreciated because they're being asked, well, tell me more. And I don't know that there's any of us that when I'm asked, well, tell me more, that I'm not quite willing to tell you more. But I found it just makes a huge difference. It's just a fundamental life lesson.
Do you think that some people feel that by asking for help that somehow that it makes them appear weaker?
Absolutely. For men, particularly in this culture, asking for help is very simply a sign of weakness. And what I've been taught is to never show weakness. Because if I show weakness, you're going to take advantage of me. So I'm going to pretend as though I know the answer, when clearly I may not have a clue as to what the answer is, because asking a question shows weakness. What I've really learned from some very wise men who are my mentors is asking questions is really a sign of maturity and of some wisdom to say, I don't understand all of this. Let me ask some questions of somebody who may really be able to help me understand the situation. So it brings just the opposite result, but we will still see younger men struggle with, if I ask a question, I'm going to appear stupid or I don't know or weak.
Well, they will certainly appear that way when they make the wrong decision because they're uninformed, right?
Absolutely.
So it makes sense.
That wonderful place after the fact where someone will say, well, why didn't you just ask me? It's like, oh, I didn't think about that. I didn't want to. I was afraid to. Yeah.
I've definitely heard that. Well, so be careful who you ask too, right? I mean, you want to ask somebody who, has something to share.
I think you have to trust your intuitive sense of This is a person that I trust. This is a person that I hold as a mentor. This is a person that has maybe more life experience than I do, that I can sit down with and say, I need some help, and ask the question.
Don't hesitate to say, I'm sorry, and really mean it.
Yeah. It's very similar to ask questions, ask for help, not be afraid to ask questions, not be afraid to ask for help. It's also, and a part of my code of doing my best to live a life of integrity is I make mistakes. I hurt people. And it happens all too often. What I would do in the past is simply ignore it and pretend as though I didn't hurt you, that somehow the impact of what I said or did really wasn't painful. Because there was an awkwardness, there was a weakness to my coming to you and saying, I'm sorry. Because what I'm doing right away is admitting I've made a mistake. And if I admit that I made a mistake, it means I'm not perfect and I'm not really in control. So I have found, even in some very strong models of accountability and clearings and how we address each other, that if I look at you, and I think it's very true, at least in my judgment for this culture, is we use I'm sorry as a throwaway comment. That it is not meant, but it is code for will you let me off the hook? I said I'm sorry, what else do you want? It's like, well, you didn't mean it. And it's really unfortunate that it has become really a throwaway comment, and it's sort of code for, don't hold me to account for this. I've said I'm sorry, isn't that enough? So saying I'm sorry and really mean it, really mean I'm really sorry for hurting you, has great value.
Yeah, it seems like what you're also saying is, I see you, right? You're seen, and I'm taking responsibility. I'm accountable, and it actually can get people out of a lot of trouble. I mean, I've seen it in the workplace where if somebody in a company identifies that you've made a mistake and you don't own it, that can really come back to bite you. But the minute you own it and take accountability for it, they might even make excuses for you, like, oh, I know we've been putting too much on you, or, I know the deadline was too tight. They're almost wanting to get you out of trouble because you've owned it. Yeah. So it can actually work to your advantage as well. I mean, obviously the heartfelt piece is most important, but even in a business situation where it may just be about your performance, owning that and apologizing and being accountable can be a wonderful lesson there too.
I think that's a wonderful example, because what I'd rather do is pretend as though I didn't make the mistake and that no one saw the mistake and no one's going to say anything. So if I say I'm sorry, now I've opened that whole area up for discussion. And rather than doing that, I'll just pretend as though it never happened. And so in the corporate example you use, which is perfect, which is to just own up to what you did. Walk in, speak to the person that you interacted with and say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake here. Here's what I did. This is why I did it. This is what I've learned as a result. Very powerful lesson.
Yeah, it definitely transcends business.
It does indeed.
If we can learn this one, that would be a much easier life, I think, for a lot of us. 2 more. So we have, consider the difference between intention and impact of my statements.
Yeah. This one's a little more subtle, and I found it to be equally as important as these others, and a little more difficult to wrap your head around. And it has to do with the whole piece of accountability, that I'm accountable for my actions and for the results of those actions, whether intended or unintended. And what I really don't want to do is be responsible for unintended impacts. It's like, I didn't plan that. I didn't want that to happen to you, and it's not my fault. And the fact is, I am accountable for those unintended impacts. And quite often that can happen when I say something to you that, and when I do something in an interaction with you, I may say, well, what happened, that wasn't my intention. I intended a very good thing. I intended a very special thing to happen, and something very different happened. And it's like, no, I'm not accountable for that. I didn't intend that. It was an unintended impact. And the fact is, I am equally accountable for the unintended impacts. And so for me to become more and more aware of what my intention was and what the impact is, quite often they line up, but when they don't line up, that I'm equally accountable to hold myself to account for the unintended impacts.
Hold myself to account. So at risk of being too hard on yourself, maybe it seems to me that looking at it as a learning experience with that person that you're involved with I mean, if you both agree that it was something you learned from, that it can soften the impact.
Absolutely. Well, the point is, it's just far too easy to say, well, that's not what my intention was. And you're left wounded, injured, impacted in some way by what I said or did, and no one takes responsibility for it because I let myself off the hook by saying, well, that wasn't my intention. I had a very good intention. Well, the impact was different, and I am equally accountable for that.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a tough one.
It is.
It is. You're talking a higher level stuff here.
That's why you're here and not someone else.
Really?
Because you've arrived at these, and I think if people can really apply them to their lives, it could save a lot of heartache.
I'm not sure about arriving here, other than I've tried to get out of situations by saying that wasn't my intention, and the fact is, it doesn't work very well.
Because you're here anyway.
Yeah.
The last one is, I don't even know if it needs any explanation, but it's laugh a lot.
Yeah.
So just enjoy the life, right?
I'm one of those people that I'm an intense person, and it's part of why I do what I do, because I'm intense, and I like intensity, and I deal in intense environments, whether conflict or otherwise, and I like it. It brings me to life. And you talked earlier about that transition from that warrior kind of energy into that sovereign kind of energy. And I found that lots of other people would laugh, and I would find that silly and a waste of time. And it took a long time to start to take myself less seriously. Not the world, not the situations I'm in, not the relationships I'm in, but to take myself less seriously and being far more willing to laugh. And to do it, I don't know about for myself that I do it lots and lots, but to keep doing it more often and see what happens as a result of a good laugh.
It reminds me of something that I wrote a blog about, and that is that there's times when we put limits on our own joy without really consciously doing it maybe, but just because we might be matching people we're with, or we think we should be a certain way in order to uphold an appearance that we want to project. And it seems like if we can be conscious of what limits we're putting on our joy, we can also break those limits and allow ourselves to achieve higher levels of joy. And clearly laughter is one end result of that.
Absolutely, and I'm sure you know, and a lot of your listeners will know the same thing. All the psychological studies about laughter and what it does for health is just quite amazing, and what it does in the brain. And I don't know any of this stuff, but all the chemicals and all the things that go on with a good laugh are just so healthy and positive. So I'm getting better at laughing more often.
It's medicine.
It's good medicine, yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and hopefully we can continue the conversation online and in future videos.
You're most welcome. It's really been fun to spend this time and to learn from you and put some ideas out there. They're going to be different for every man and every relationship, and hopefully this will help just a little bit through that healing process.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You are most welcome.